Hello, I'm Alva. I'm a marine biologist, and I just got transferred to the Virgin Islands Institute of Oceanographic Studies. Mattis, one of my new colleagues, was arguably the team's weirdest scientist. He was extremely clumsy, a total loner, often grumpy, and very rarely interacted with anyone. As researchers, we're used to working alone, but Mattis certainly wasn't a team player. He wouldn't tell anyone about his progress or results. I used to think he was a simple, normal guy, but I accidentally discovered his secret, and it definitely changed my mind about him. That day, the director of the Research Institute had asked me to bring a folder to Mattis's room. His room was separate from everyone else's, and very few people from the Institute had any chance to visit with him. And for this reason, most researchers would call it the mysterious chamber. When I got there, I knocked on the door several times, but nobody answered me. Since I was in a hurry, I had no other choice but to open the door with the intention of simply leaving the folder on the table and quickly going out. But the scene that awaited me behind the door instantly made me weak in the knees, and my legs began shaking uncontrollably. The atmosphere in Mattis's office was sinister and gloomy. It's true that scientists are free to decorate their room as they wish to, but the layout and decor were really bizarre. The whole room had been painted black, and the dim lighting was a dark red. After getting used to the darkness, and as I looked around, I saw that an unusual skeleton was set against the wall. Its upper body was very much like a human skeleton, but its lower body looked like a fishtail. Had it once been a living creature, or was it one of Mattis's monstrous creations? This definitely piqued my curiosity, and I decided to get closer in order to touch the fish bones of the tail. But in the obscurity, my hand mistakenly pushed a lever next to the creature, thereby opening a secret door that led to a downward tunnel, and I couldn't help but enter to see where it went. I quickly reached a research lab built at sea level. It contained a large aquarium filled with what looked like sharks, and I assumed this was where Mattis got most of his research done. The smell was strong, ammonia-like, and my eyes stung. The walls were made of transparent glass, but strangely, the water inside was pitch black. I really couldn't see much until suddenly a large fishtail slowly started undulating in front of me from behind the aquarium wall. I managed to turn on a lamp set high above my head, but as I looked again in front of me, I jerked back in horror. The tail was, in fact, a mermaid. Was I dreaming? Was it, in fact, alive and real? I put my hands in front of the mouth so as not to make a sound, but the poor creature was tied up with 2 large chains and seemed to be in so much pain. The chains seemed to be lightly electrified. By chance, I quickly identified the generator outside of the aquarium and disconnected it immediately. The mermaid then managed to free herself from the chains that were tying her hips, and she instinctively dashed towards me while growling fiercely. I was so scared by the scene I was witnessing that sweat started streaming down my temples and forehead. As I removed my glasses to wipe off the sweat, I clumsily dropped them on the floor. I got on my knees right away and started searching for them frantically until my right hand touched someone's leg. I immediately heard Mattis's voice, and as I put on my glasses, which I'd finally recovered, I looked up and saw him holding an axe about ready to cut my head off. As he was swinging at me, I dodged each hit by rolling to the side, but Mattis quickly picked up the axe again and tried cracking my skull a second time. All I could think of was that my end was near, and I was ready to die then and there. But in a stroke of genius, I suddenly remembered the sharks and the sound generator that I just developed and was keeping in my pocket. I hurriedly shoved my hands in my lab coat, took out the sonic device, and turned the ring to the maximum level. A few seconds later, the sharks went absolutely insane. They began punching their heads violently into the glass walls and managed to break the aquarium open. As they slid out of the water onto the lab floor, a first whale tore off Mattis's left arm, followed by a second shark that bit off a large chunk of his torso. Blood was gushing out of his arteries and started painting the floor red, but water was oozing out of all sides too. In less than a couple minutes, the lab had become an aquarium, and I was getting weaker and weaker, fighting the rising waters. I struggled looking for a way out and felt that I was about to drown when a mermaid suddenly appeared before my eyes and dragged me away. Lucky guy, huh? When I woke up, I found myself safely lying on a hospital bed, convinced that the mermaid had saved me. I sincerely hope she returned peacefully and freely where she belongs, in the wild blue ocean. I told this story to my friends and was met with a lot of skepticism. They believe that I was probably saved by dolphins and that I mistook them for the mermaid. Anyway, regardless of what happened, I'm still haunted by this story, and I still work at the Institute, and I'm passionate about what I do. But I'll never look at the ocean the same way again. And I'll always be reminded of that mermaid every time I eat a meal of fish sticks. My name is Felix. I'm a psychiatrist and have encountered a strange case that science cannot explain. When this happened in 2008, I'd been invited by a client to come to her home to evaluate her son's mental condition. The young man, then in his 20s, remained living in the family home, refusing to talk or visit with anyone. He was clearly suffering from severe autism. One particular thing, he loved to draw. In fact, he would often lock himself into his room for days at a time, or choose a secluded corner in the park only to draw pictures. Lately, he'd been showing signs of instability. He would look insecure, upset, sometimes even crazy, screaming that he was about to die. The mother had grown increasingly worried about her son's condition, and she reached out for my help in the hope that I would help him to recover. I asked for her permission to enter his room and to talk with him. Luckily, the door was unlocked, and I was able to get a slight peek inside. Pens and paint littered upon the floor, and the room was actually quite chaotic. Not what you'd expect from an art lover's haven. In one corner sat a skinny boy, painting with a blank look on his face, sometimes mumbling something incomprehensible. But before I could even step in, he began speaking to me, asking to know if I wanted to know my destiny or not. That was the very first time I had met such a patient. There was definitely something very mysterious about him. And as a psychiatrist, my first thought was that this person had indeed been suffering a mental problem, but I was curious about what he had to say. As I entered the room, he didn't scream or go crazy like his mother had told me. In fact, he proved to be extremely friendly towards me. He began holding and showing me his paintings, including a scene of a restaurant being burnt down, a traffic accident, and then numerous scenes of people being shot and killed, lying in pools of blood. The pictures also included numbers that he believed were the respective days that these events would occur. This strange guy also claimed that the scenes he drew were predictions that would happen in the future. Of course, like everyone else, I didn't believe what this young man was saying and thought he was merely showing signs of paranoia. I then left the unusual room to meet with his family and inform them that I would come back the next day to begin a mental treatment plan with him. However, the following day, and almost eerily, the famous restaurant that I would drive by every day suddenly caught fire as I passed by. I couldn't help but think that it looked so much like the boy's drawing. It was precisely this corner of the intersection. Everything was so detailed and accurate in the painting, but I'd not paid much attention until it actually happened. After witnessing the accident, I immediately drove on to meet the young man, but as I arrived, his house was closed. The neighbors said he'd gone crazy and had been rushed to the mental hospital by his parents. I hurriedly asked for the hospital's address and drove away. I usually turn on the radio every time I'm on the road to catch up on the news. On that day, a catastrophic series of shootings had occurred in a supermarket, killing many victims. What was even more strange was that everything went exactly as depicted in the boy's picture I had seen the previous day. Could he really be able to predict the future? As I arrived at the psychiatric hospital, he'd been tied to a bed. Although his body did not flinch, he would scream that he and his parents were about to die in an accident. A few hours later, the doctor concluded that his condition was too severe and that they had no sufficient means to calm him down. They recommended to the mother to move him to a better psychiatric hospital offering modern equipment and professional medical staff. His parents and the 2 hospital staff helped him to get into the car that would drive him to the downtown hospital. I joined them for the ride, but for some reason, he began fighting violently, refusing to board. Even on the way there, he kept screaming that the car should stop or all would die. His hysterical premonitions made me feel uneasy, and I suddenly remembered the picture of the accident I had seen the previous day. It was an image of a crashed ambulance following its collision with a container truck. But by the time I remembered, it was too late, and the accident had already occurred on the highway. Everyone in the car died, and I was the only survivor. Luckily, I was only injured, but nonetheless hospitalized, as both my legs were broken. My work is so intensive and demanding, make me feel so uncomfortable and tired that my brain is just crying out to find a comfortable place to lay my head down. But this was a special 2-year anniversary of my relationship, so I chose a store on Baker Street to buy my girlfriend a present. It was about 8:30 in the evening. I felt I was going to be late for my appointment, so I had to rush to make it there on time. I walked briskly through the crowds of people on the sidewalk to the bakery. The icy air from the snow made me shiver, and I tried to keep my hands deep in my pockets so I wouldn't freeze. As I walked out of the store, the pasta gradually started to cool off. I made my way along the sidewalk with a food parcel in my hand to a nearby subway station. And suddenly, a boy ran up to me with a sad, pitiful look on his face. It made me feel dumbfounded. As I was about to approach him, he suddenly grabbed the food parcel in my hand and ran into another direction. I tried my best to chase after him. I had to get that food back because I knew there was no time to wait for a second pasta. I chased the boy through several paths, then ended up in a small alley. It was a dead end with no way out. What surprised me about this alley, it was that there were countless cats and dogs wandering around. Suddenly, the boy stopped and turned to gaze toward me with a mysterious smile, if you know what I mean. I immediately knew that something was wrong, and when I turned my head to look, I saw two ferocious-looking thugs approaching us. One with a tall, large figure, and the other looking rather small. The big one smirked and said, "Boy, give us the bag of money and we'll let you go. Hurry up!" I watched at every one of them in panic, not understanding what was going on. And that's when he suddenly punched me in the face, which made me feel dizzy. I touched my face and glanced at them. I didn't even realize I had blood on my hand. I furiously looked at them and began screaming, causing the whole group of wild cats to run away and panic. Since this place was completely deserted, no one noticed us. And in that moment, a terrifying demon appeared in front of me. In the darkness of the alley, the figure of the devil unconsciously stuck in my mind. It had an extremely large figure. Its gnarled appearance made me feel terrified. In particular, his red eyes looked very intently at me, as if he wanted to devour me on the spot. But then he laughed horrifyingly. In panic, I took a few steps back. The thug next to me looked at me with confusion, and his eyes were ebony black, and they stared at me. And then he turned his gaze on his brother. I was petrified and felt like my soul had left my body. My limbs trembled, and I was unable to speak. I nervously watched the thugs as one of them shouted, "Demon, demon, someone please help." But the small thug blankly stared at me with a mysterious, evil smile. It amazed me that he was not afraid of the devil standing in front of me. Or was I the only person who was seeing it? I anxiously started asking for his help, but it failed. This demon in front of me had sharp, bony hands and fearsome fangs. It slowly approached us and left out a scream of horror. There was no way out for me to escape. With the devil in front of me and those aggressive thugs at my back, it seemed like everyone was trying to prevent me from escaping. At that moment, suddenly, I heard a voice. It whispered in my ear, urging me to kill the devil and run away. At first, I didn't notice it because I was so scared, and the voice kept repeating in my ears, making me crazy, and extreme anxiety filled my head. I held my head in pain, angrily looking for the demons, and I quickly turned my body to grab a long iron beside the landfill. and vigorously beat the demon back and forth to kill it and destroy my fear. The more I feared, the harder I hit it, revealing the strength and courage I didn't know I had in my body. Although the devil did try to attack me, it ended up being knocked down on the spot, with blood flowing all over the ground. I turned and looked at the little ruffian in horror. His face turned pale, and then he quickly ran away from the alley, leaving me on my own, fighting my own fear. Okay, seeing the demon lying on the ground, I quickly threw the iron aside and ran out of the alley. Right now, I'm in the hospital with that nasty little thug. He is so crazy, as he dared to say, "I'm the devil." It seems like he's so obsessed that he's going insane and has now ended up being tied up on the bed by the doctor while I'm being moved to a separate room. Hello, my name is George, and I live in Cambridge with my wife and children. I'm one of the few professional hunters around here. The county forest is quite dangerous, and only a few people actually venture into the woods. A few years ago, there were still many animals in the forest, and we would often bring home 3 or 4 rabbits or even a boar after a single day of hunting. Then we slowly started seeing less and less of them, and we assumed that most of them had gone deeper into the forest to seek shelter. But going so far into the forest is really dangerous. For that reason, I came up with an idea to both safely and efficiently hunt more animals again. I spent quite a lot of money on cameras that I installed in various areas of the forest in order to see where the animals tend to gather and stay. I then set up traps in designated spaces so that I could still make nice catches while staying at home. And since only a few people go into the forest, there was no need to worry about accidentally hurting people. Besides, I monitored the cameras diligently every day in case something unexpected were to happen. My genius method rapidly became quite successful, and in less than a week, I caught a couple of pheasants, hogs, and hares thanks to my traps. My workload also became much lighter. All I had to do was go to the forest early in the morning to harvest the bounty from the previous night and to replace the used traps. By mid-morning, I was home for the day, sipping a cup of tea while watching the cameras. But monitoring the screens soon became a nightmare. One evening, after dinner, and as usual, I sat at my desk with a cup of Earl Grey and logged into the video monitoring system to see if my traps had been effective. However, something unusual caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a deer, but when I looked more closely at the screen, I realized in panic that a little girl in a white dress was standing next to the trap that I had set earlier. How could an adult let a child get lost in the woods so late at night? What parent would do that? Afraid that she would severely injure herself with the trap, I hurriedly put on my coat and ran into the forest. But strangely, when I arrived, nothing was standing next to the trap. She was nowhere to be found. Still, in a state of bewilderment, I suddenly heard a small child giggling in the bushes in front of me. Thinking that she was hiding there, I dove into the shrubs, pushing the branches to the side to try to find her, but I stepped back in horror when I discovered a child's sandal covered with mud, and still no little girl around. My whole body started shaking uncontrollably. Sweat was trickling down my forehead and temples. I tried to reassure myself that I had dreamt of seeing that child, and quickly turned around to rush back home. That night, I couldn't get any sleep. I got out of bed at 3 a.m. and returned to my desk to check the cameras, but there she was again. The same little girl was still playing alone next to the big tree and the trap. Because it was dark, the image was quite blurry. She looked like she had no legs, and a part of her right arm was blurred as well. I got closer to the screen, hoping to recognize the little girl, but she suddenly turned her head towards the camera and stared at the monitor with big gray eyes. I immediately turned the cameras off and went back to bed right away, trying to convince myself I was having visions because I was sleep deprived. The following morning, I took the video footage to the police station in order to find out who that little girl was, but the police officer in charge just shook his head. He didn't recognize her, and no missing child profile in the past 2 years matched her description. I began wondering if it was a prank or if she came from another part of the country. Following my visit to the station, my creepy video of the strange little girl became the talk of the town. Reporters from national television even got interested in the case. And then, a few villagers recalled an event that happened 10 years ago. A little girl about the same age as the one on the camera had been hit by a train while spending the afternoon in the forest with her family. Could this be a coincidence? Everyone immediately started speculating that the little girl on the camera was none other than the spirit of the deceased child. Something didn't seem right, so I shared this story with the press in the hope of finding out the truth. A month later, a man named Jack Wilson contacted me to tell me that the little girl from the picture was not a ghost, but it was his granddaughter, little Heather, now 9 years old. He and Heather had just stayed for the holidays at a hotel just outside of town. One night, he woke up and realized that she was no longer in her bed. He began looking for her everywhere and even searched the nearby woods. He found her sleeping next to a big tree and was also where the camera was located. It seemed that the little girl had been sleepwalking into the forest and accidentally entered the camera angle. But when I asked Heather about the sandal she lost and the giggle I heard, she just shook her head and looked at me with those big gray eyes, saying she didn't remember anything. Could this be another case of a ghost who's really dead but doesn't know he's passed, still lingering? Or is this another case of some legend? You decide.
At the beginning of the school year, a rumor started spreading around the school that an old tree had the power to bring lonely hearts together. Not that Jonathan or myself would be interested, right? According to the rumor, anyone looking to make the object of their affection fall in love with them had to accomplish a specific ritual. One had first to write the name of the loved person on a sheet of paper. Then, one had to collect hair from that person and tie it to a few strands of one's own hair. Place the tied strands on a sheet of paper, fold them into a tiny parcel, and bury it in front of the tree. After a couple of days, one's wish would come true. This whole spiel was initially circulated on social networks, but Jonathan and I suspected it was merely a lame prank made up by bored students. Well, that is until Linda, a female student from our class, decided to use this urban legend to get the school hunk. She didn't listen to my advice to forget about it, especially considering this guy already had a girlfriend, and she still followed the weird ritual. A few days later, the whole school was surprised to hear that the guy had broken up with his girlfriend and was now dating Linda. But things didn't stop there. After a month or so of happy dating, both Linda and the guy started changing drastically. The two became quiet, too quiet, and looked very tired and distraught. Then, one day, as I was home writing articles for the sports column, Jonathan called me and told me to hurry to school because something dramatic had happened. A student had found Linda's boyfriend dead, hanging from an old tree behind the school. The school and the police had set up a blockade in order to prevent anyone from seeing that horrific scene. But Linda managed to get through, and her heartbreaking screams and cries were heard miles away. A week later, Linda still hadn't come back to school, and I started to worry about her. I convinced Jonathan to come with me to visit her. When we arrived, her Terry mother opened the door and told us she had locked herself up in the room and hadn't eaten or drunk anything ever since. We still went upstairs, and Linda agreed to let us in. She looked so thin, so frail, and her eyes were red from crying so much. She had dark circles under her tears, and her hair was a mess. She sat on her bed and started muttering something. I went near her to comfort her, but suddenly, upon seeing Jonathan, Linda screamed and said that she was sitting on Jonathan's neck. We were both completely startled and didn't quite understand what she meant. Following her boyfriend's death, she started suffering from psychological problems, which could have been an explanation for this nonsense. But although we tried asking her what it was all about, Linda refused to say anything. 1 week later, as we were all in class, we received the shocking news that Linda had hanged herself at home. Jonathan and I had a feeling that the old tree behind the school was not foreign to any of this, so we decided to find out the truth. We immediately went to Linda's house and asked her parents if we could borrow her diary on the grounds that we wanted to use it to honor her memory in the school paper. In her diary, Linda had written that despite having a guy she wanted and loved, she never felt truly happy. Whenever they would be together, her boyfriend would always behave in a strange way, physically present but otherwise completely absent. She also wrote that soon after they started dating, she would often see a ghost-like woman hanging around her boyfriend's neck. That eerie creature had particularly long hair and would look back at Linda with an evil smirk. The day before she committed suicide, Linda had dreamt that this woman, bloody-faced and wearing a crumpled school uniform, was standing under an old tree behind the school. She was laughing hysterically and asked Linda, "Do you really want to be with this boy forever?" Linda had immediately nodded in approval and hanged herself the following day. I read every word written in the diary and got goosebumps and shivers all along. But we were even more intrigued by the old tree and went questioning former members of the school's press club to ask about a possible explanation. They then told us about a sad story that had taken place at our school 10 years earlier. At the time, a popular couple was making the school's headlines. They would meet under an old tree after school every day, and this tree had become the symbol of their love story. One day, out of the blue, they broke up after the guy had fallen in love with a younger student. Heartbroken and devastated, the abandoned girlfriend hanged herself from the same tree on graduation day. Students in school started a rumor saying that the girl's soul would bless love stories and saw the tree as a sacred and magical one. Young couples would meet below its majestic branches for their first date or kiss. Others would bury tight strands of hair at night or early in the morning before school. It's funny how they seem to have forgotten the terrible and horrific conclusion, and that she hanged herself in the end. The rumor and myth has been passed on ever since, and many female students keep on following the ritual and trusting their happiness to the tree and to the spirit of the deceased young woman. I wrote about it in the school newspaper, hoping to convince students to beware of the curse. Although my article was very successful and read by most, I'm afraid untimely deaths are not over yet, and that we'll keep on burying heartbroken souls.